But in a situation where you find that a look at this,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, welcome back. We're going to begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. And the Daily Trust leads with a story 9 years after. Banks battle discos over 820 billion naira debts. And the riders there say employees decry salary backlog. Others. NERC to halt owner manager regime. This is according to sources. Little to show in increased electricity supply. You'd also see investors overpaid, poorly managed discos. This is according to experts. And other stories on the Daily Trust newspaper this morning: tariff dispute. NHIS brokers truce between healthcare providers, HMOs. And on page 6 on the Daily Trust newspaper, you see the story about bandits kill 9 in Sokoto, Kaduna, Niger, abduct 50 in Katsina village. It also found a story about Senate setting 3 trillion naira target for revenue agencies. National Assembly transmits reworked electoral bill to President Muhammadu Buhari, and that story be found on page 16 on the Daily Trust newspaper. NNPC seeks energy transition investments, targets low carbon economy. It also find APC chairmanship. Unity, stability will be my bond. This is according to Senator Musa. You'd also see a pictorial there of bandits that were captured and remanded at the police station on Monday. And then below that, you'd find how IPOP killer herder shot Igbo man's 30 cows. And some of the riders there: my animals worth 30 million, Peter Onyedo. Late herder spent 20 years working for Igbos. You'd also see killing despicable. This is according to Miete Allah, Cattle Breeders Association. These are some of the major stories on the Daily Trust this morning.
All right, now let's take a look at The Guardian this morning. There, the lead story, all about politics. Adamu panel asked for time. February 26th APC convention shaky. You'd find the writers there saying efforts to reconcile aggrieved chieftains inconclusive. And then we will carefully study interim report of committee, Namani assures. So other stories at the top there: National Assembly transmits reworked electoral bill to Buhari for assent. And then INEC raises security concern, vows to disqualify erring parties. Balogun others withdraw suit, postpone Ibadan chieftaincy declaration review. Terrorists kill 12 raise homes in Katsina. And then you'd also see Amechi announces delay in rail projects as China suspends funding. Customs, immigration raise alarm as revenue losses threaten 17 trillion naira 2022 budget. And that's on page 6 of The Guardian. And then at the very bottom there, very tiny story there, how Nigeria, others can leverage technology to boost energy access transition by Kerry. These are the stories on the front page of The Guardian today.
On the Punch this morning, APC February convention uncertain. Peace panel demands extension. And the writers, their petition still being submitted. We need 1 more week, says committee chair. APC registers 41 million members. It also see governors rules out convention postponement. And you see a pictorial there of quite a number of suspected political thugs arrested by soldiers in Ekiti State. And other stories right at the top on page 21. Federal government probes 17 firms over breach of customers' private data, hikes fines. And on page 2, Malami to decide Electoral Act bill. National Assembly transmits document to President Muhammadu Buhari. And on page 21, 243 firms jostle for CBN's multi-billion naira loan scheme. Okorocha unveils presidential bid, knocks zoning, ex-governor charged with 2.9 billion naira fraud. And you'd also see other stories there on the Punch this morning on page 20. EFCC detains Medview airline boss for alleged $900,000 Hajj fraud. And on page 4 and page 5, human parts found with me for my ex-boss, promising 30 million reward. This is according to driver. It seems in recent times there has been a lot of ritual stories, you know, on the news, and it's really, really very sad. You find the detail of that story on page 4 and page 5. Fear grips Ekiti community over influx of herdsmen, farmers deserted. These are some of the major stories on the Punch this morning.
All right, now let's take a look at the Nation newspaper. On the Nation, the lead story says why APC is in crisis by Boni Reconciliation Panel. You'd find the writer says ego, perception, failing division. Panel with 47 petitions asks for more time. The stories at the top there above the nameplate. High chiefs withdraw suit to end Olubadan's succession row. You'd see also EFCC slams 2.9 billion naira fraud charges on Okorocha and others. Ex-Imo Governor Tambuwal to run for president. The writer says Peter Obi weighs options. Well, these are the most visible stories here. There's also another story at the bottom below the leading story. It says revenue generating agencies get 3 trillion naira target. Customs laments Financial Act effect. So these are the stories here, mainly on the Nation newspaper this morning.
Okay, let's take a look at some more stories on This Day newspaper. The lead story there states, Buhari, my successor will inherit homegrown economy, stable democracy, revamped security forces. Oh, wow. And then the writer there says, Nigeria facing historic transition, says Obagbena rather. Nigeria, UK move to deepen security, hold defense partnership dialogue in London. And other stories there on This Day, 100 for 100 policy. CBN disburses 23 billion naira to manufacturers. MFLA new forex policy underway. And federal government stakeholders land Apex Bank's drive to boost economy. NMPC positioned to lead Africa in energy transition, says Kyari. These are some of the major stories on This Day newspaper.
All right, finally, let's take a look at the Blueprint newspaper this morning, which leads with the story, federal revenue generating agencies, why we can't meet National Assembly 3 trillion naira annual revenue target, and that's on page 6. The writer says 2022 Finance Act had robbed customs of its operational mandate, and that's according to CG, the Custom Controller General of Customs, Hamid Ali, retired. Also, you'd see another story there. We lose 400 billion naira annually in outsourced services to UK-based firm. And that's according to the Immigration. Senate promises to look at the Act contract. NAFDAC warehouses 3-year capital votes. Below that, why Ogoni cleanup project will outlive Buhari administration, according to the federal government. And then also, you'd find at the very bottom, 21 Kogi local government areas provide free Medicare to 300 communities. JAM fixes 2022 UTME for May 6th to 16, adopts USSD code. Hoodlums burn Obasanjo's 139-hectare mango farm in Benue. You'd also see insecurity. AMAC donates 30 cars to FCT police. Other stories at the top there talks about commercial banks still flout CBN directives on BVN failed transactions. Stock exchange announces federal government's multi-tranche 4 billion naira euro bonds. 5G network, aircraft not in danger in Nigeria, NCAA DG. And then the last story, the APC reconciliation, more work still needs to be done. That's according to the committee. Well, these are the stories on the front pages of our papers this morning. We have in the studio Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, to give us perspectives on these stories. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning. Happy New Month.
Yeah, same to you. All right. Quite interesting stories. Political stories are everywhere this morning. Yes, specifically talking about the APC convention coming on the February 26th. Now, the peace panel is raising alarm that, look, we need more time, in line with the fears that others have expressed, about the likelihood of that convention being, an explosion. So, I don't know. What do we expect?
I think what is coming to the fore now is not unexpected. If you recall, the conventions were hurriedly fixed after the president's New Year media engagement, where he said the continual delay in having that convention could lead to conceding grounds to the opposition. And so they had to come up with a date. But the committee had been in the works since September last year. The idea is to reconcile aggrieved. I mean, you don't go to a contest with a divided house. I think that is the essence of that reconciliation. With over 40 petitions, if you really want to achieve genuine reconciliation, it's not just enough to receive petitions. You also have to study them. You have to understand the issues that are being brought forward, and then make genuine efforts to resolve conflicting parties. And these things take time. It requires sometimes a forth and back, and a forth again, and a back, and some kind of truce, which would somehow require compromise. So they felt that the time between now and the convention is rather too early. They were supposed to have submitted their report on Monday. And if you must hold a convention on the 26th, as we have heard, then the party should have taken that reconciliation report, looked at the the recommendations, act on them, and then come up with a date. Set up subcommittees for the convention that would determine how much nomination forms will be sold. You have to do the selling of that form, and then somehow screen candidates, take candidate submissions and then screen them ahead of the convention. And where people have a problem with your screening them out, you have to leave room for them to contest that denial, and then you resolve those issues before the actual convention. So you see, there are quite a number of things that would happen before the convention, and they feel that the time is rather too short for them to do that. But some governors have continued to express confidence that the date will hold. Apparently, if you are in good standing with what the status quo is, you don't feel any pressure, because maybe somehow it favors you. But these are all germane issues, and it puts to question whether the February 26th date will be visible. But that will be a question for the APC active party members to really ponder upon.
But do you see, further postponement, because governors are ruling out, that?
Yeah, but largely because governors are very strong party members. They call the shot. They are the leaders of the party in the state. If they really wanted to go ahead, especially again because they also provide a chunk of the funding, if they wanted to go ahead, somehow it will go ahead. But the fears of all those who are calling for one form of extension or reconsideration of the date had been going into a process with a lot of unsettled issues would just mean, usually even where there are no such problem, after the conventions, you see a lot of implosion. People who feel they deserved a space that we're not given naturally will start looking for alternative platforms to pursue their aspirations. So if you even go into this one with so much of these issues to resolve, it just basically leaves the room for even more aggrieved members to begin to think of the alternative vehicles to ride on.
All right, well, another story to look at. The Daily Trust leads with the story about banks, battling with discourse over 820 billion naira debts. That's since 9 years, now. What exactly do we know so far as the story?
The Nigerian privatization story as far as the power sector is concerned has not exactly gone smoothly. I mean, not comparable to what we have seen in telecom sectors, where the moment the private sector came in, they took complete charge, of that sector and what they needed to do, whether it is in terms of investment, whether it is in, planting the kind of infrastructures that would take the service to the nooks and crannies of this country. And if you recall those days, it was a big story on NTA or on the newspapers. If they are getting into a new town, they will say, we are now live in Borno, we are live in Kaduna, we are live in Zaria and all that. Those were the kind of experience that we got firsthand from privatization. And everyone had hoped that with the power sector privatization, maybe for once, it would have relegated government to the background and allow private fundings to really now come up and replicate what we have seen in the telecom sectors with the power sector. But the story has been different. Has been different for a lot of reasons. Some argue that the power assets were overpriced at privatization, and so people had no complete idea of how much it really needed to rejuvenate this power sector. So the moment they were done with the acquisition, they became stocked, with so much debt that it left them with not so much to invest in the actual revamping of these nearly dead assets that they bought. That's one part of the argument. The other is that the people who bought this asset really did not have the deep pockets or the technical know-how to kickstart those kind of rejuvenation. And so the effect of all of these different crises it had gone through had seen government coming back again to bail and rebail the power sector with all kinds of power sector intervention coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria, which apparently is the money belonging to you and I. So it is more like we are privatized, but we are still injecting government funds to make these places even remain afloat. And so in all of the interventions and everything they had taken from the bank, we had seen nearly $2 billion, about 820 billion naira sunk into this power sectors. And yet, most of them are still comatose. I mean, the Ibadan Disco was just taken over by the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. All of us are aware of the TOZO at the Abuja electricity distribution company. We know that there was a similar challenge with the Yola distribution company. I mean, and the crisis seemed to spread right quite evenly, So it's so much that needs to be done. In fact, the National Electricity Regulatory Commission is even talking about a crisis with owners who had brought out funds to buy these things but have no technical capacity to manage them, running the places directly, because these are technical assets. You may have the funding, but it requires a different kind of skill to run. There are also other genuine state crises which has to do with whether it is the supply of gas, to the generating plants, or whether it is the inefficiency of transmission equipment not being able to evacuate as much power that is even generated. I mean, our transmission lines are weak, we understand. They do not have the capacity to evacuate all we generate and even distribute them. And whether it is even the issue of pricing, of the electricity asset. How many times they have intended to raise the prices, and we keep shouting that the prices would be beyond the average Nigerian. They are saying in terms of modern reality, current realities, exchange rate, and all of that. Whatever we are buying this power at is not visible for any kind of growth and reinvestment into the sector. So the issues are huge. You know, I can't tell you now what really needs to be done. Perhaps more funding has to go into that place, but beyond funding, you know, a complete reevaluation of how the power sector is currently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there's one other story on This Day newspaper that states Buhari, my successor, will inherit homegrown economy, stable democracy, revamped security forces. In your assessment, is this really so?
I honestly wish. I wish that would be the situation for whoever is the successor to this government with less than 15 months before he hands over the baton. You know, not just for the sake of the successor, for you and I mean, in the name of God. We were discussing before this program came on live on how some of us are profiled based on our religion or the places we come from before we are even able to rent a house in a federal capital territory. That is a snowball effect of the distrust, the deep-rooted distrust that is taking all of us, you know, by the jugular. So there's a serious crisis, whether we choose to admit them or not, whether we choose to be apolitical or, you know, take sides with any government. All is not well. You know, and for them to even say we hope to do this, it means wherever we are today is not ideal. The only thing we can do is to wish them well, because everyone is tired of the current situation. Honestly, we couldn't have asked for better, because with insecurity, with instability, you really can plan. I mean, at the Daily Trust Dialogue, you heard clearly how households barely boil water and drink and pretend that they have eaten for the day. That's not a palatable condition for anybody.
No. Well, other interesting stories from the economic angle as well. The revenue generating agencies of government are saying that, look, this target set by National Assembly, 3 trillion naira, is way above what they can meet and all of that. For instance, the Customs is saying that the 2022 Finance Act somehow limits their operations in some way. And so do you think that there's some kind of policy somersault here?
I don't think it's a policy somersault of some sort. Usually with new policies, you'll find these overlapping tendencies here and there. And this revenue generating agency, I think they do not include the customs, the FIRS, whose mandate actually it is to raise revenues. They are just other agencies of government that are categorized as revenue generating. For instance, the immigration, especially because of the number of Nigerian passports that is sorted on an annual basis. The Federal Road Safety Corps, for instance, because they issue licenses that are paid for by Nigerians, whether fresh or renewal, and including vehicle plate numbers and all of that. Because the customs alone did about 2.4 trillion, you recall. The FIRS did about 4.5 trillion. So these two agencies did somewhere in the region of 7 to 8 trillion naira alone. But they are complaining that with the new Finance Act, I'm talking about the customs, that there are one or two things that they felt used to be in their domain that have now been vested in other agencies. For the immigrations, for instance, they are saying the annual worth of the Nigerian passport business per annum is somewhere around 400 billion. That's somewhere around $1 billion. But because it has been contracted to a firm abroad, I think Malaysian or island firm, the government gets only 30% of the proceeds. 30% of whatever is the proceeds of 400 billion. Another 7% is given to immigration to maintain their facility, and about 60% goes to the contracting firm. And the questions they were raising were valid. If we really want to plug revenue loophole, we have the Nigerian Printing and Minting Company. If you invest half of that money in that company, whatever it is that it is lacking in being able to print Nigerian passports or security documents in Nigeria should be able to, I mean, it should be provided for. And we've been doing this for nearly 10 years. So if you like multiply 400 billion by another 10 years, you'll be talking somewhere in the region of 4 trillion that has gone in the directions that none of us can really account for. So that is a revenue leak. And then if you wake up for that kind of agency where it's major source of income in those kind of things, and you wake up and you say you are increasing their target, I mean, how do you expect them to raise that kind of money? You know, so those are the things. So on the one hand, that is why these agencies are raising concerns that if you really want us to do this, but then some of these things that are inhibiting our optimal performances should also be considered and reviewed.
Okay. You know, there's this other story, you know, that seems to be a problem for us, and it has been making the rounds in recent times. It's the issue of, you know, ritual killings. Here on the Punch newspaper, it states human parts found with me for my ex-boss promising 30 million naira reward. Just a few days ago, I think we saw the story about 3 young, very teenagers, I would say.
15, 14.
Yes, teenagers that cut the head off of one of their girlfriend or something. It seems it's becoming very rampant these days.
I think for a number of years now, we have allowed all kinds of things to hit our screen, you know, and it's alarming how people now want to simply get rich, I mean, using every way possible. You can't understand it. I mean, we saw the ones that had already killed. Just 2 days ago, another video went viral of 12, 13, 14 years old boys saying they left their city where their parents are based to another city, and they said openly before the TV cameras that their ambition is to become Yahoo boys, you know, in quote. And you know what that includes? You know, the rituals are included and all of that in the bid to become rich. And you wonder what a 14, 15 years old wants to do with the kind of money it aspires to get. So it's appalling. We are really, really losing it. Something really has to be done, especially because when you see people with ill-gotten wealth flaunting them left, right, and centers and becoming the center of attraction in a society that has lost value for hard work, for ethical conduct, then he begins to tell people who are coming behind them that if you really want to become somebody, if you want to be recognized, if you want to live a comfortable life, then this is the way to go. We have to find a way to discourage this kind of wealth. First of all, by even asking questions. Based on your age and the things you do, there are certain kind of wealth that are not expected of you. If you are seen flaunting those kind of wealth, then questions should be asked. I mean, there were even apparent contradictions. Just 2 days ago, over the internet, a renowned pastor somewhere in Port Harcourt, you know, called for these boys to stop this act. Another pastor seated somewhere else was saying the Yahoo boys are not the problems of this country. You know, you can imagine the seeming contradictions coming from the altar. One in an attempt to condemn what he feels is a problem, and the other one saying, you know, you should be talking to the politicians instead, rather than talking to these kids.
You know, talking about that, it seems as if the social media space has created a kind of attitude or habit where people just seek attention at whatever cost. They do not care about the message that they throw out there, but just to get their attention. So whatever it is that will get their attention for me, whether I'm on the right path, whether I'm sending positive messages or negative messages, it doesn't really matter, as long as, you know, it brings the traffic towards me, it generates conversations around me and all of that. That's a big issue.
I agree. What the social media has done, which is the downside of social media, is to democratize dissemination of information. So these days, you don't have to wait for any media house to put out anything before you consume. It's a marketplace of ideas, positive or negative. But that again, you know, confers on us, the media, and including the government, the responsibility not just directly to regulate the social media space, but to also churn out positive information that provide sufficient and adequate counter for this kind of negative information, you know. So, and these strategies must be deliberate. So if you are doing something that is, videos about the other day of people who part of the rituals were supposed to excrete in a public place, in a public junction by daytime, somewhere in Imo State.
I saw that video too.
So what happens after that? Those guys they were not putting on a mask. The government, through its agencies, would have been able to apprehend these people and bring them to book. And the world must see that these guys are properly reprimanded in the open, just to serve as deterrence for people who think because ABC did it and nothing happened, I can as well replicate these things, because it is actions without consequence, that encourage more people to do the same thing. If you are active and you are able to arrest 4 or 5 of those celebrity cases and treat them in the way and manner that they deserve, and show people that when you go this route, this is the kind of judgment that awaits you, then it sends a different kind of message to people who are watching them, who would then understand that this is not a banana republic. You can just not do anything you want and go scot-free. So,
needless to say, the way and manner in which we handle criminals, especially those who have money, even the security, officials that that handle those people, sometimes they are not treated as though these are criminals. They are treated as though these are some kind of celebrities or something. They give them all kinds of cover, and all of that. The way in which they protect them and all that.
We saw it with, I'm trying to remember the personality now, who was remanded in prison. And when they came out of the prison house, we saw a fight between 2 government agencies on who to take over that person. It speaks volume. It tells you of what kind of treatment that person is even likely to get behind bars. That is, if at all, he's even treated like somebody who is a criminal, in quote. So much is wrong with our correctional system. So much is wrong with our justice system. So much so that people don't even see them as being has been hard enough, to deter future occurrence of those things. So, if you like, the criminals see it like a simple way out. We heard the story once of a permanent secretary who was tried for so much money, and at the end of the trial, he was convicted for a certain amount of money or with an option of jail term. And we understand that he came out of the courtroom and headed for his booth and brought out whatever it was that was supposed to pay for, and paid for it outrightly, and they commenced the process of setting him free. It's how cheapened, justice has become in this country, and until the punishment outweighs the crime, more than doubles the crime, people would really not see whatever we have as justice system. In our justice system as deterring for any kind of crime, really.
Okay, now the National Assembly has transmitted the reworked electoral amendment bill to President Muhammadu Buhari for assent. Do you think it's going to be different this time around?
Well, the president, in his words, if we would hold him, said he is willing to sign the amended electoral act if some of the observations he made, are taken into account. And in fairness, those amendments have been made. So we hope, in good faith, that the president would also assent to it, not just for the sake of the National Assembly, but because this whole process has kept the Independent National Electoral Commission in abeyance. Procurements need to be made for the devices that will aid these elections. Some of these procurements are not items that you buy off the shelf. You have to reach out to the manufacturers with certain specifications, and they have to go through a procurement process themselves, to then manufacture this item, test run them for quality control, and then go through all of the hassles of logistics to also ship them in. You have to take this inventory in, and also try some of these materials and ensure that they are in good conditions for the election. So this is a procedural thing. And so the area we sort these things out, especially the parts that will require those procurement and all, so that they can then begin proper preparations, because credible elections is a function of preparation. If you get everything right and the preparation is poorly done, it can impede on the credibility of the elections.
quite a number of issues really of interest. Now, also, in the past few days, we've seen a kind of well, I won't call it a surge because it's always been like that, but more like terrorists now becoming more bolder. They issue threats to communities to say, hey, if you don't pay us, we're going to come after you. We're going to rain fire on you. And they did that, even when the communities pay the levies, imposed on them by these terrorists. Over the past few days, we've seen in Sokoto, and now even on the front page of Daily Trust newspaper, we're told that 9 people have been killed in Sokoto, Kaduna, and Niger, and then about 50 were abducted in Katsina State. So, well, recently, that the Nigerian Air Force, for instance, says that they now have about 38, aircraft in their possession, to deal with this criminal activities. But one wonders really whether we've been able to deploy all of that, with the proscribing of these terrorists, I mean these bandits as terrorists now by the government.
That's a difficult question to answer because what we have seen in the Nigerian context is that aircraft do not translate to results on the ground, It's also difficult because some of the things we see, appear to defy logic. And I say that because if people are gathered in this building and you do anything to cause disarray, what will be the next course of action? They will disperse, right? Maybe to the building to the left, or to the one to the right, or the ones behind. So if you are going to do anything to disrupt their peaceful coexistence here, where should you wait for them? The likely places where they will disperse to. So you are hitting Kaduna, you're probably hitting Zamfara, but you are doing nothing in Sokoto, you're doing nothing in Niger. Isn't it common sense that once they disperse, they will reassemble again in these places? So that is why I say some of the actions don't logically adds up for some of us, especially because there is really no wall between one state or the other. Sometimes you don't even know when you had crossed the line, so it is only common sense that as they move, they will be causing havoc along the paths that they travel. And so what we have seen is places that have nothing to do with the original cases of banditry and the rest now suffering massive casualty because these bandits seem to be relocating from point A to the other. And maybe we can't exactly say that some of these killings may be as a result of confrontation. You come into a community that is not known to your ideology and all of that, and they try to resist you. The next thing you do, because you have a superior firepower, is to just shoot innocent women, children, and farmers who you have nothing to do with your grievances against the state, against or whoever you think has offended you. So it's a failure of our security architecture. And they keep saying they are reviewing this architecture, they are reviewing it. So you wonder what is being reviewed, because in earnest, it appears that we have been doing the same thing over and over and over again. And the next thing you will hear now is that maybe they probably will have to shut down telecom maxes in these places again so that they are not able to communicate. We have to be more pragmatic. Pragmatism in this case would then involve carrying everyone along. We already know that this action we are going to take will snowball into ABC and XYZ. Have you sensitized the community on the fringes? Have you tried to create some kind of synergy with their local security network, the vigilantes as we have come to know them, such that they can sell credible intelligence to you, or even provide some kind of subtle resistance until backup is available? I mean, you were reading the update and we hear of how they go from community to community. These guys are not flying private jets themselves. And sometimes moving around the northern part of this country can be a Herculean task because it's a massive land space. And so maybe they have carried out this operation in a space of 5-6 hours unhindered. It speaks to the whole comment around pockets of ungoverned spaces around this country. So you wonder how they can transition so smoothly and create so much havoc And sometimes we don't even get to know of it until days after the incident, had happened. So it leaves a lot to ponder about. It shows a complete disconnection between the efforts that are being made at the center and what is actually happening in the fringes.
It's quite
All
tragic.
right. Well, another story that I would like for us to, take a look at is the story about how IPOB killed a herder, shot Igbo man's 30 cows in the southeast. I mean, it's more like the saying that when you are in the market, do not throw stones, because you really don't know who is going to hit, or another one throws stones at the glass house. But I mean, if you look at this story, the owner of the cows is actually an Igbo man. So if IPOB says it is, fighting for the cause of the Igbos, here you have it. Your own fellow Igbo man is now being, impacted negatively by your actions and all of that. I mean, it says, the man, his animals is worth 30 million naira, for him. And the herder has been working there for about 20 years.
Some of those prejudices that live with us, that is now affecting the way we do things. What has been happening in the Southeast, if you ask me, is a people, loading their own gun and shooting themselves on the foot. Even if the herder wasn't an Igbo man, you are likely to contribute to the economic development of the place where you reside. He sells his cows, for instance, in that market. So he provides a nourishing value. He probably pays his tax to the local community where he stays. Who knows? The manuals generated by the cows nourish the ground where he lives to operate. So for somebody like that, he's not exactly a nuisance. He is not your problem. If he's been there for 20-something years, he's not like the ones who travel from Mali and all of that and pass through your places and cause havoc and disappear. He identifies with that community. He doesn't feed on his cow. He probably needs to go to your market to buy food. That's spending in your local community. Those are not the kind of people you want to harm. Except you don't know the value, the economic value that they bring into the system. A man who has cows worth over 30 million, his annual average expenditure would not be less than $1 million spent in your own economy. Those are the kind of people ideally you should be looking for. And so it shows you how so much disconnected we are from how everything we do in turn comes back to hurt us. If you do these things, you are destroying economic activity and you cannot make progress doing that. Some of the advanced economies we envy were not built by people from just that part of the place. It was built by capitals that came from all over. We should be encouraging that, So like you said, at the end of the day, it turned out that the stone they threw in the marketplace ended up hitting one from their own household. Unfortunate as it may, but I mean, it speaks volume.
Right.
And until people who should condemn these things rise up to condemn them, and not just condemn them, but take concrete steps to stop them, we will continue in this vicious cycle. For instance, you want to ask yourself, the IPOB have always mentioned that the Southeast are part of their territory, but why is it difficult for those pronouncements to take root in the Southeast? Because the governors have said, hey, if you do anything here, we would match you banter for banter. So leadership in those places must take responsibility. You think people sit at home because they enjoy not showing up at the market? I mean, the Igbos, as we know, are shrewd business people. You think they want to sit at home and lose some of them sell perishable things. So it means for the 2-3 days they couldn't go out, it meant they lost those things. What is the economic benefit to them of keeping them at home?
Wow.
We have had to run stories here of our artisans who live daily by what they make and do with their hands, have been crying about the effect of this thing. So the only way to kick against this thing is for everybody who is on the other side to come out and say enough is enough.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Daybreak this morning. We've been speaking with Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, Sunday Michael, giving us perspectives on the program. We hope to have you next time as
It's
usual.
my pleasure. Thank you very much.
When a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or
but I
regional.
have said that